Hello and welcome to the Moviescramble podcast. You join us on this fine Sunday morning-ish, yep, still Sunday morning, towards the end of well, what's laughingly called a summer month in Scotland, but it's not really. With our usual weather report, it's been a bit pish as usual, but it's actually quite nice this weekend, so we've been getting out and about, which is all very good. With me today, as always, is the ever delightful Mary. How the hell are you, Mary?
I am really good. I've genuinely been so looking forward to this podcast all week because I'm very, very excited to talk about these films.
Nice one. As Mary alluded to there, we are going to be talking about two films that are not quite recent, but we thought they were worth a conversation. Both of the films are Italian films, one from 2014 and one from 2019. Later on, we will be discussing a film called 5 is the Perfect Number. So the first film we're going to talk about is a film called I Can Quit Whenever I Want from 2014. Now, to give a wee bit of background to why we're actually doing these, we both attend the Glasgow Film Festival on a regular basis when it's run February, March time. And the festival has a history of showing a lot of films from different countries, but there seems to be a reasonable emphasis on films that come from Italy over the years. I've seen probably the best part of a dozen really good Italian movies over the time that I've been going to the festival, and the quality of them is really top notch. I realise that you are probably getting the best of the independent Italian films anyway, but to say they're actually independent is kind of not quite true, because they all seem to be in association with RAI Cinema from Italy anyway, which is one of the major broadcasters in the country, but that's an aside. So anyway, there was the first one is one that I saw in 2014, and Mary didn't have the pleasure of seeing that one, and the second one was from 2019, which Mary saw and recommended to me. So between us, we obviously had another look at these films in order that we can have a chat about them today. So, like I say, the first film is a film called I Can Quit Whenever I Want. This is an Italian crime comedy film directed by Sidney Siblia. It's actually one of 3 films. There have been 2 follow-ups to it, so therefore I won't spoil anything that happens in this film in case it impacts anybody's viewings of the second and third film. Not that I know for certain if anybody's actually going to go and watch any of these films as well. The premise of this is all based around academia. Basically, in one line, you can describe this as academics earn really crap money and you need to do something about it. So it stars Eduardo Leo as Pietro, who is a neurobiologist. He comes up with ways of identifying and working with molecules, and the work he does is very complicated, but he can't get funding in order to carry out his research that he wants, and the teaching element of his job as a professor is very poorly paid, which is a nice wee tie-in with what we talked previously about with Hitman, where it was a college professor who had to take a sideline working for the police because he didn't earn enough money. So therefore, going into academia does not pay the bills. This is the case with him because he basically doesn't get the grant he's looking for, and he's going to be out of work. And his wife then announces at the same time that she's going to have a child, so therefore the pressure is on him. So he decides that he has to do something. Now, he comes across one of his students in a nightclub who has bought this drink for, I think it's 200 euros he spends on it, and it turns out that there are various psychotropic substances in the drink, and he tries the drink, gets off his tits on it, obviously, like as you would do if you're spending 200 euros on something, but then realizes what he actually consumed was a bit rubbish and he could probably do better. Now, the problem with that is that it's illegal. There is a list, especially in Italy and all across Europe, I would imagine, probably further than that. There is a list of substances that are illegal. You're talking about your heroin, cocaine, various amphetamines, things like that. And that list basically says, if your substance contains these elements, then therefore it is illegal and the law will come down on you in the way that it quite rightly will. So his plan is, as a biologist, he has the means to synthesize a substance that will not be on the list and therefore not be illegal to make and to consume. Problem with that, again, is that the way that it would be distributed would be illegal because they're not paying any tax or anything. It's always the way with gangsters; they get them on tax
It's always
fraud.
the tax evasion, yeah.
Yeah. So what he does is he pulls together various other researchers and academics who are in pretty much the same situation as him. There's a social anthropologist, there's 2 language experts, there is an archaeologist who they just bring along because he's got a van, which I thought was quite nice.
Yeah.
And there's an actual chemist as well, and there's a mathematician to handle all the financials. And they set themselves up, and it goes very well. But of course, this isn't just entry into a market that has no other players. There are various other very seedy players in this scenario as well. And it's how the film is based around how they set up, how they tackle the initial problems, how they handle getting the initial sort of tranche of cash, and what they do after that. So that's giving you sort of a brief synopsis of the film. Mary, what were your initial thoughts on this little jaunty comedy?
So I obviously went into this completely blind, and what a wild ride. I absolutely loved it. Like, I couldn't stop laughing. The dialogue is so sharp, and it's rapid fire as well. Like, if you're trying to take notes and watch this film at the same time, it's actually very hard because they speak so fast. But, I mean, the colour is like bleeding off the screen. It's like hyper saturated, like all these like neon kind of like blues and yellows and reds, and it's kind of an assault on the senses. But the performances are great, the comedic timing is spot on, and it's just, honestly, I've written down so many wee quotes that I just absolutely loved because I just thought this was so much fun. And it's obviously, I mean, I'm trying to think when Breaking Bad came out, because it's very much got that kind of flavour, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like, he's obviously not sick, he's just very much up shit creek when it comes to financials, but it's like that whole idea of using your academic knowledge to become this sort of unsuspecting drug lord. But it's just, honestly, I cannot recommend this highly enough. It was such fun to watch. Yeah,
I would agree with you on that one. With a lot of films that we see, especially in film festivals, and I know this sounds like real first world problems, but you tend to go into the majority of films not knowing very much about them at all. Basically because the films haven't been given any sort of distribution at that point. They're still doing the festival circuit, so there's limited knowledge and information about what they're actually about, who's in them. You make it the bare bones. If you're lucky, you'll get a trailer. A lot of the time you don't even have that sort of luxury yet, because all that's prepared for sort of general release stuff. So I went into this film completely blind, just based on, I think it was like a 3-line sort of synopsis in the program for the GFT. And I just thought, sounds good, I'll try that out. It'll be, it fitted in nicely with the schedule and everything, I remember, and I just thought, yeah, I'll try this out. And I was completely blown away by it. I thoroughly enjoyed it. It's an hour and 45 minutes, I believe, and it just whizzes by because it is such fun. Like you say, it's like a screwball comedy. Yeah. The way the dialogue kind of hits and comes through and everything. What did you think of the way that they set it up initially? Obviously, the lowly professor. How did you think they introduced everybody? Did you think that worked well?
So I thought it was really interesting because the opening moments of the film, you've got like some sort of armed robbery going on in a pharmacy, and it's basically like one of those, so this is me, you're probably wondering how I got here kind of openings, like you see that you're very familiar with in kind of American TV shows. And then you've got this, it cuts to this poor soul Pietro trying to make this really, what he believes is this groundbreaking presentation to these really bored looking, like sort of like fellow professors. and his colleague's phone is ringing, but the ringtone is like a scream or something. So that's really distracting that's going off. And then, you know, all these various other things are going wrong in his presentation. The projector blows up, and you just, from the minute he's introduced, he just seems so downtrodden, like just nothing's going right in his presentation. And then when he goes home, you know, they've got a bill in for the lift not working in their apartment. So it's, and you can tell that that's like the last straw for him. So he is set up to be this kind of, I don't want to use the word pathetic, but clearly like he's got a passion for his particular subject that is obviously not shared by his esteemed colleagues. And he's obviously really struggling at home because he's just simply not getting paid enough, and his wife is basically handing him a bill the minute he gets in the door. So he is set up to be this quite sort of pathetic character, but knowing what you've seen in the opening moments, whereas I say there's this armed robbery going on, you are kind of wondering how the hell are we getting to this, because he's you know, he's got a sweater vest on, like surely that's not, you know, the same character or whatever, but I think it sets him up really, really nicely.
Yeah, it makes him out to be, I don't know if pathetic's the right word, because he's an academic, he's a teacher, so he wants to teach, and that's what obviously the passion's about. When he's got these students in his house, when he goes back there as well, and none of them are actually, they work the system, so they're not paying him the money that he's owed or anything, and he finds it very difficult to ask for that, because academics in general are kind of detached from the real world in a way, because they work within the sort of confines of university, they socialise within the confines. I've known a couple of academic sort of university lecturers, and they're just completely fucking nuts. They are on a different plane of existence. They're perfectly nice people, and you can go on very well with them, but you know that they're not always concentrating on the conversations that they're in. They're thinking about other stuff, and they're thinking in terms of, well, why am I dealing with these people? Because they're stupid, they're not on the same sort of level as me or anything like that. So there is elements of that, but yes, you can see the sort of desperation creeping into him, because he feels it's pressure after pressure, and then suddenly it's, what are we going to do with my child kind of idea as well. In fact, that actually comes a wee bit later in the story, but yes, it's still all relevant because it kind of ramps up all the tension and everything. But yes, you can see the sort of desperation, and the fact that it takes something completely out of the ordinary, as in taking this substance, to kind of spark that idea within him to say, this is something I know how to do. This is something that I understand. I could deal with this. There's a nice wee scene where he'd been at the club. He had sort of come down from whatever he was on, and he was back home after being peed on. With a penis in his face, and having been splashed because he'd become unconscious at the side of
that scene toilet. Was horrible. He woke up in a toilet cubicle in a club, and first of all, everyone who's ever been to a club knows that all the floors are sticky, and so the fact that he was actually sitting on a toilet floor asleep, and then he gets woken up by the splash of somebody else's piss hitting his face. Awful.
Yep. So anyway, he's in the house, and he's looking all this stuff up about illegal drugs and what makes it and all that. And his wife comes in and says, "Have you been up all night?" He says, "No, I just got up early to do. I'm just browsing on the computer." And she says, "Well, just remember to delete your history."
Honestly, there's so many good lines in this film. Like, see, even when he comes home and he says, and she gives him the bill for the lift, he's like, she's like, you could ask your friend who's the lawyer, and he says he's an expert in canon law.
Yeah.
And then you've got the student who's like asleep in his bed as well, meant to be taking classes. Honestly, I've generally never met a film that has opened with such chaos. Like, and then it uses that Offspring song in the sort of opening sequence, that "Why Don't You Get a Job?" And it's just, it's so good. But I think it's interesting how he has this moment of this €200, like, I don't know, like a speedball, like cocktail or something like that. And all of a sudden he realizes that drugs are just molecules, and that he knows how to manufacture one that won't be on the illegal list. Because that's really what this boils down to, is he thinks he can cheat the system by creating a molecule that's not already been banned because it's so new.
Yep. And obviously it gives them a bit of breathing space in that they are free to manufacture it. But
Mm-hmm.
they know at some point that it might come to an end. But I think the plan would be then you create another one that's just slightly different and it just sort of meets the requirements to not be on the list. So obviously after he has his moment of revelation, he knows that he can't do this on his own and he has to form a team. Now, there's a real danger here in terms of the story, because if you're dealing with these oddball characters, and let's face it, as I said before, there's a lot of academics and these oddball characters, it could be a bit much. Now, he recruits 5 or 6 different people here. Do you think that that works, given the fact that they were all strange characters? There was no normal, just sort of... there was one that you thought initially was the social anthropologist. You thought he was a normal guy to begin with. But the rest of them very much their quirks. Do you think that kind of worked in terms of bringing them to... or for a start, introducing them and then bringing them together? What did you think about how they tackled that?
But first of all, I think it makes perfect sense that they're all friends. So that is a solid sort of basis. It's not like he's just this random, you know, and then you go through them all and you get introduced. Like, so Benelli obviously is trying to count cards and poker games and failing miserably. And he's in, you know, loads and loads of debt. And Petrelli obviously is working at the sort of cafe place. And then you've got the 2 brothers who work in the petrol station as well. But it's interesting. Yeah, because they're all taking these sort of like what they would probably see as kind of low-level jobs, obviously, to bulk up the fact that their academic salaries don't, or they've just simply not been able to get contracts within universities. So they're kind of stuck in these other jobs because they actually don't know what to do with themselves if they're not doing sort of academic research. So I do think it makes sense that he's friends with them. And I think you get enough of an introduction to all of them and their sort of quirks that when you get into the sort of middle sort of chunky part of the film, that you can see like a wee bit more of their kind of characters coming out. For example, you've got the scene where Petrelli, who's dressed like one of the village people, sits down next to somebody in a club and he's like, "Hi, as you can see, I'm a homosexual too." And he's trying to sell drugs. But it's like, it makes so much sense because I can't remember who it was, but one of them is like, you know, the only thing we know how to do is study. One of them says, and that's why, like, all of these sort of mistakes, as you would say, that they're making, and, you know, as I say, they're really awkward dialogue where they're sitting down next to somebody and trying to sell them drugs, all makes sense because they are these sort of men who would rather be sort of buried in their textbooks or teaching a class or whatever. So I think it sets them up perfectly, and the dynamic between them, because they're all bickering over basically who's the smartest and who has the most kind of street smarts, is, I just think it's phenomenal. I think it's so well done. It's so funny.
Yeah, I really liked it was almost like a wee sort of montage scene and when they were getting set up in order to do the first sort of dealings in the club. And the social anthropologist had to talk them all through their roles and say, when you're standing there, you have to give an air of sort of indifference. In fact, just dismiss people the first time they come up and speak to you. But in order for people to come up to speak to them, they have to have this presence where other people are actually interacting with them as if they know them. So they were all going up and giving them a hug and things like that, you know, how are you doing and all this, and then going away. And that would then pique the interest of like people around them who are looking to sort of score something. And they're saying, like, you have to be aloof, don't look down, keep your chin up at all times, you know, and just have this complete air of indifference, almost like sort of disgust at the people that they would actually want to get these substances in the first place and all that. And it was like the whole sort of setup of that. I really liked it. I thought that was excellent. The fact that this guy talked them all through the roles and what they all needed to do. And one had to be the lookout and everything, you know, and one guy had to be in the cubicle and slide the stuff under the door and everything. You know, just the whole thing.
And he didn't want to do that because he thought he could be a bigger part of the operation. So they were even bickering about what their role was as drug dealers. It's awesome. Yeah,
it was, he didn't like being in the confined space and all this sort of stuff, all that, you know. Yeah, I thought that really worked very well. And I like that because it plays on skills that they have. Now, the social anthropologist, he did that before because he was trying to get a job in a junkyard. And he was pretending that he was a normal, not just a normal guy, but a guy who had like a really sort of dodgy background. And he had been in prison and all this, so he'd be perfect for this sort of job where, you know, like working in a junkyard, which might not be 100% legitimate. You just don't know. That's the kind of vibe you got. But he started to use certain amount of academic language when he was discussing. And the guy that he was being interviewed by says, "You're a graduate, aren't you?" And it was right away. He doesn't take these people because they spend too much time reading books and not actually doing their work or coming up with suggestions on how to make things better. He didn't want that. He just wanted somebody to come in and work. And I thought that was excellent, because the guy was sitting there and he was wearing like the vest with the chain on and he had the sort of handlebar moustache and everything. And he was trying to look tough and all this, and it just disappeared in a second when he was found out, and he suddenly became all very animated, and it was spot on. It was really, really good. Now, you mentioned the color palette in this film. It's like hyper saturated. Everything is past the point of being just in your face. It's almost distorted in parts, and I think that was very deliberate, because you don't get that with everything. You don't get it with the skin tones and things like that as well. So, but why do you think they did that?
Honestly, I think because it feels like one big giant trip. Yeah. Like, it's the colours in it are so ridiculous. Like, as you say, and they don't do it with things like skin tone. It's not like everybody's cutting about looking orange, but everything else is almost like, it's almost got a glow off it. It's so, so strong. And I just think it's almost to highlight, one, obviously this is a film about kind of psychedelics, but two, is to kind of highlight the sort of ridiculousness of the situation. Like, it is this kind of, I don't want to say dreamlike quality, because the colours feel sort of more nightmarish than a nice dream, but it is this kind of fantasy land where they're not really operating in the real worlds in their academic life, but they're not quite operating in the drugs world either, because we obviously get introduced to other characters who this is their living, and they're very much more scary than these guys are. But it's I feel like almost to sort of highlight the sort of subject matter of the film, but also this kind of in-between world that they're living in, where they're obviously not, as I say, these sort of hard drug dealers or whatever, because they all have to be taught how to act, but they're not quite the sort of lowly academics either. They're kind of this in between, and this color palette that, as I say, is kind of bleeding off the screen, and it's quite like, there are scenes that, especially in the nightclub, where it's very, very intense. Even the first time Pietro tries the drink, it's this sort of like luminous blue, where you just think, why on earth would you put that in your body? But it's just this kind of over the top sort of, as I say, dreamlike kind of quality to it. It's bizarre.
Yeah, that's what I kind of took from it, in that right from the start, you're being told visually, this isn't real. This is completely detached from the real world. So just go along with it. Like you say, there could be elements of you've actually taken something before you've sat down to watch this, and that in combination with the fact that it was a very quick film, what dialogue was quick. They didn't hang about in terms of the story either, so therefore everything's sort of heightened in that way, and the visuals just play along with that, because it's very, very much in your face all the time. I didn't feel distracted by it at all, because I got kind of used to it very, very quickly. But you know, I thought yes, I thought it was a bold choice, put it that way. I don't know if the second and third film are going to be exactly the same in terms of that, but I haven't seen any. I've not even looked at those, but it wouldn't surprise me if there were a lot of similarities there as well, if they'd followed through and certain things like that.
Yeah, I mean, it is a very striking choice. Like, I think that I almost feel like in a way they sort of get away with it because the dialogue is so fast, and as you say, this is an hour and 45 minutes, but it does not feel like that. It absolutely dives straight in, and the story is like this, you know, it is A to B to C to, it's very, very quick moving. I think had this been a film that was more sort of like, the dialogue was sparse and it was very sort of artsy, I could see the visuals starting to grate. But I think because the whole thing feels absolutely batshit, the visuals make perfect sense, and they also get away with the fact that they are sort of subjecting your eyes to these colours for nearly 2 hours.
Yeah. I mean, the fact that this film was so successful and actually spawned sequels, it's actually spawned a remake as well, as a Spanish remake of the film, which I think is, which is closer to the original story. Well, the film was inspired by a a book, I think it was, or it may have been a film, called La Banda degli Onesti, which had three men facing economic difficulties and what they had to do. And it was like counterfeit bills, I think it was, that they were dealing with. Now, the Spanish one has three academics in it, so it's kind of a mix of the two. So it works in that way as well. And, you know, it's always interesting to see a film that's actually translatable in that way. And usually it's translated from a non-English language to an English language remake. And I think with this, that wouldn't work particularly well, because the language doesn't translate in the same way, the style of it. I know we've had screwball comedies and things, but we haven't had things like that for a long, long time. They've been tried, but they've not been particularly popular because people don't like them.
No, I know, which is weird, because I absolutely love like your classic 1940s sort of screwball comedy, and this very much, as I say, the dialogue in particular is this, like, you know, one person's barely finished their sentence before somebody else is jumping in with the next line. Then I can actually see how that would definitely work in Spanish as well. But you're right, I don't really feel like there's an English language sort of equivalent of that. And that's not to say that, you know, academics in the English speaking world don't get paid really poorly and this isn't plausible, but it's just that it feels, there's something about it that just feels distinctly sort of maybe European, I suppose, I guess would be the thing. And the thing is, and that's not because of like setting in particular, because this film obviously is set in Rome, but it's not like you're getting like, there's one scene where the brothers go and hire an apartment, and he's like, oh, it's the best view over the city. But that's kind of fleeting. The setting, in a way, I don't want to say it's irrelevant, but it's not like they're spending long, lingering shots, you know, pointing out landmarks or whatever. But it does. There is something about it that feels quite, I don't know, European or Mediterranean, I suppose.
Yeah, it could be located in a number of different places. Just located, I don't think they mention that it's Rome, particularly, maybe just in passing, like you say, that it could be any metropolis, because the same sort of setup is in these places. They've got lots of universities. Major towns usually have some sort of academia attached to it anyway, just because of the nature of it. Same way they have a cathedral, they have a university, probably have a river running through it as well most of the time as well, that kind of idea. So yeah, makes perfect sense. What do you think of the secondary characters? Obviously we've talked about the main character of Pietro. Now, he had a wife in this, so she wasn't in it in any particular length, but we haven't really talked about the gang in itself. Obviously, we've mentioned them in passing being completely batshit crazy and wildly different, but why are they different? And what did you think of the wife's character for all she was on screen?
So she's not on screen for a lot. Julia, her name is, but and this has to be kind of a bit of a spoiler, but at one point, obviously, Morena, who is the sort of big drug dealer in the area, realises that Pietro and his crew have been dealing in his patch, so as revenge, he kidnaps Julia. But what I love is that I feel like I don't want to say long-suffering, but you can tell that her husband's foibles are something that she's very much familiar with. Like, she kind of puts up with all his little idiosyncrasies, but she doesn't turn up for a fancy dinner that he's organised, and it obviously turns out that Morena has kidnapped her. But even that, she's sitting in the back of the car with her arms folded, her eyes are rolling, and it's just kind of like, for fuck's sake, Pietro is very much this. She's not like screaming for her life or, you know, worried that something really bad's going to happen. It's just like, this is more shit that I need to put up with being his wife. And you can just tell that she's just really, really over it. So I thought that she was used kind of sparingly but effectively. Essentially, her job is to be the straight man against all of this chaos that's going on. You know, Pietro and his pals are all quite into this drugs world very quickly, and her job, I guess, is to be the voice of reason. She runs what appears to be like a sobriety group, where she's helping people, you know, they all sit in a circle in a park and she's helping them sort of get off drugs. And there's that beautiful little scene where they're having breakfast together, her and Pietro, and she's talking about how, you know, she can't believe that the drugs deaths are up in the city and that this new drug is on the scene. And all he can say is, oh, but are they saying it's like a cool drug? Or are they just saying it's okay? So he wants customer feedback, essentially, from his wife who runs the sobriety group. So she's not on screen for a lot. This is a sort of like pal's caper, as it were. But she is very much as I say, the straight man to all of the chaos.
Yeah, there's another wee scene where she's running a group, and someone is describing the effects of the drug, and they're saying, "Oh, you know, it's not like your normal stuff. It takes you to a higher level. It's so much better." And she's disgusted, and she says, "Another testimonial for it." So yeah. So obviously the gang as well, they are introduced individually and then they're brought together as a group, and you can get an indication of what they're like already. They are kind of they're all a wee bit disgruntled, like say they've been working in petrol stations. It's one of them. They all seem to have horrible bosses.
Yeah.
Because there's the guy that works in the Chinese restaurant washing dishes. There's the two brothers who work in the petrol station. There's a guy who works for the city digging up archaeological bits and pieces. Although even that's fraught with danger because the guys are using jackhammers to break up the road and stuff like that. And you've got the guys who are involved with circus people.
Yes.
So they've all got these sort of desperate situations. So they kind of all react to the success in a pretty similar way, I think, which you get this time and time again in films, that when people become successful through criminal enterprises, it's their own stupidity that leads to their downfall, and here is no different. I mean, what did you enjoy? Honestly, the way that they became stupider?
It was, again, I think it's because they are set up as characters with no sort of like, there's no harm to them, but there's no sort of social understanding either. So in their world, this is what it's like to be rich. So they have this, you know, ridiculous apartment, there's pool parties, they have all these girls. I mean, I love this scene where Paprika, the name of the escort, and Pietro's shouting at Alberto, and he's like, do you not think these girls are escorts? And he's like, well, I tried to ask her, but she only answered in Russian. And then you've got, so he's obviously having the time of his life. The sort of brothers that work in the petrol station are just sort of constantly bickering over various wee things in the department. And then you've got Bonelli, who was the one that was involved with the kind of travelling circus. And he's somehow been roped into quite literally a shotgun wedding because he's made the mistake of trying to woo this young girl. And obviously in exchange for sleeping with her, he's been marched to the altar. And again, he's like, oh, this isn't legally binding, right? And kind of winks, and the person that's performing the ceremony is like, no, you've just signed this, it's from the city, you are now married. So there's all this kind of, they've all got their own kind of wee bit of chaos going on in amongst the sort of bigger picture thing, but I just think it is exactly how you would imagine these kind of middle-aged academics who probably, I'm making a sweeping generalization here, but probably maybe not been that successful with women in their lives. They're obviously so wrapped up in their own particular specialities, and now all of a sudden they've got the money that gets them the apartment, the cool clothes, the sunglasses, the women, and it's like, you know, kids in a sweet shop. They just almost can't believe their luck. But of course, it's this sort of ostentatious display of newfound wealth that is the problem.
Yeah, I liked it because it started off very subtly. It was Pietro getting a new jacket, and it was a sort of silk jacket, and his wife says, "That's silk?" He says, "No, it's just this shiny acrylic stuff, you know. I sweat really badly in it." But that's the sort of first sign that he's actually changing. It's just a subtle thing like that, but then it completely ramps up. Like you say, the brothers rent this completely ostentatious apartment building which overlooks the city, but even then they're not satisfied. They're saying, you know, can we not get rid of some of the pillars and open it up in here? It is a bit stuffy, you know, a bit claustrophobic. And you're going, you know, they've got a pool in an apartment, so you know it can't be that small. And you've got the likes of even the archaeologist guy. Like in between them, they do everything that you would expect of people with stupid amounts of money to do. And like I say, the archaeologist guy, he gets a tattoo in his neck, which is a very sort of gangster thing to do, because it's what he wanted, you know, it's wanted, and it's like an archaeological artifact that he actually gets tattooed in his neck. And you're going, come on, it's just
and it appears to be one of the escorts that's doing it, so you're kind of looking there and going, is that going to be okay in a few months' time? Sort of looking at it. So, but yeah, and I think it's like some sort of like Roman ruin, as you say, that he gets. So it's genuinely, I can't. It's all very well for me to sit here and say it's just so funny, but I do feel like it's one of these films that needs to be experienced, because you are sort of just soaking up all of this nonsense and all of this behaviour, and you're thinking, yeah, that's exactly, as I say, how these sort of middle-aged academics, because they don't know how to, like, they're not going to be like out buying guns and stuff like that. It's not anything like that. It's the things that they think are cool, and I think that's what makes it work really well. It's because you can imagine that, yeah, he absolutely would think that getting a tattoo of some sort of rune would be a cool thing to do. So yeah, it's perfect.
Yeah, and it's like the chemist, he buys himself a sports car as well as having paprika with him at all times.
Yes.
Which, yeah, I just... so yeah, you can just see them completely... And there's a wee sort of Reservoir Dogs moment as well, where they're all walking into club and they're all dressed cool and they're all wearing gorgeous, shades, and it's all done in slow motion and everything. You're just going, yeah, all you need is Little Brown Bag playing in the background to that one, and that's just a complete sort of homage. So I think in a way the film did kind of homage sort of heist stories and sort of these sort of good guys gone wrong, you know, people in desperate situations in a very funny way. And I think it did kind of work for me in terms of that. I thought it was good. Now, obviously, with any film, or any decent film, I should say, you need to wrap things up in the third act. Yeah. Did it do it to your satisfaction?
Yeah, so it's interesting. In a film that's so chaotic like this, I was kind of wondering about, I would say about an hour into it, I was kind of like, where is this going to go? Not in a bad way, because I was enjoying myself, but I was just wondering how they would wrap it up. So obviously, sort of the further Pietro gets into this, he realizes that, you know, he's suddenly getting invited to parties that are full of like MPs, judges, celebrities, all this sort of thing, and these kind of higher echelons of society that he probably looked to naively as sort of trust figures at one point. He realizes they're all sort of in it and they want to buy his product as well. So that sort of brings Morena, as I say, who's this kind of bigger drug dealer, out of hiding, as it were, to come and find out who Pietro is and how his gang are doing this. So, I mean, it's almost like the sort of the fall of Rome itself. I mean, the decline happens just so quickly that, you know, all of a sudden it's like they go from being slightly idiotic and selling drugs in clubs to kids to they need to perform a pharmacy robbery, because in order to get Julia back, Morena wants, is it 10 million euros worth of product, and they just don't have the capacity to create that much, so they then have to rob a pharmacy. And then it's like a sort of, I don't want to give away the ending, but that all kind of goes into even further chaos. I do think it wrapped up quite quickly, and then you get a sort of glimpse of how all their individual stories kind of tie up neatly in a bow. And again, I won't give away the ending, although that had main stitches as well. But I do think it happened quite quickly. I wouldn't have actually minded an extra 15 minutes or so worth of runtime, because it did sort of go from Morena's on the scene to now he's kidnapped Julia to now they need to make this kind of product. And I could have used a wee bit of extra time on that. I would say that's maybe the only sort of flaw it has, if you even want to call it that.
Yeah, possibly there was an opportunity there to have a wee bit more of the antagonist. But that might have been something that's explored in further ones. I don't know. Like I said, I don't even know.
Maybe, I was kind of wondering that myself, that maybe he was just being introduced in this film and that it was going to take on, he was going to take on a sort of bigger role in the subsequent films. That thought did cross my mind. But as I say, I wouldn't have minded an extra 15 minutes or so on this, because it's a film that flies in.
Yeah, I did like the character though, the antagonist character. He wasn't in it very much, but when he was, there was a sort of menacing presence to him, and then there's a bit of a twist, which I won't give away, obviously, in terms of what he is and how he fits into the story as well. So that, I thought that was particularly good. And the scene between Pietro Moreno and Julia, when they're having this discussion, was top notch, because Julia just sits, basically she's sitting there with her arms crossed then as well. She's just going, not only Pietro, not only are you an idiot, the guy that's trying to best you, he's an idiot as well. So I particularly like that. I thought, it was excellent. But yes, it could have had a little more time, but I don't know if that would have enhanced it in any way for me.
No, and in fairness, I don't know that it would. I don't know that it would have changed anything, as I say, given that I only realised after I'd watched it that there was 2 further films. Afterwards I was kind of like, oh, that makes sense. Maybe they go on and talk about this in films 2 and 3. But at the time I was thinking I could have done it with an extra wee 10 minutes here, just because sort of it does feel like it gets wrapped up very quickly. But having said that, though, it matches the pace of the rest of the film. I mean, like I said, trying to take notes whilst I was watching this felt like an impossible feat, because it's just rapid fire with the dialogue. So for me, yeah, I would have preferred a little bit fleshing out of that, but that's just a personal thing. As I say, it may well go on and do that in the second and third films.
Yeah, okay, that's fair, I suppose. So, wrapping up, would you recommend this film?
Oh my God, with bells on. Like, I have been talking, again, it's one of these films that once I've watched it, I'm going to bore everyone to death with how good it is until we all sit down and watch it. I had no expectations whatsoever. I didn't even really know what it was about. I just saw the poster and thought it looked kind of like a comedy. And it's one of the funniest, driest, cleverest films I've ever seen, where, albeit there is this quite large cast, everyone feels like they get their turn, as it were, in the spotlight. And it's just, yeah, batshit from start to finish. I absolutely loved it.
Yep, I would agree with that. I thoroughly enjoyed this film. I really enjoyed all the performances in it, and it worked very, very well as a comedy film. It works very well on its own, and you can watch this without, I would imagine, without watching the other two if you don't want to. I don't know. The others have got similar ratings on IMDb, so they're obviously up there. There's not like a great drop-off in quality, but yeah, they're all around about the sort of 6.5, 7 out of 10. So, you know, I think
they
were
give
kind
this
of made
6.5 out of 10.
Yeah, well, I don't know how widely it's been seen. That's the thing, you know.
That's true.
It's just well, the first one got 7 out of 10, so which is good, but not super great. You know, there's obviously a lot of scope in there for being a lot better. Like I say, I would recommend this film heartily, but the problem with recommending this film is I don't know where you can see it. It's not been around. I think it has been given like a DVD release, but it was kind of like in Italy and things like that. It's not on any streaming services in the UK at the moment, so it may be a little difficult to see, but it may well be on YouTube and stuff for rent. So it's probably a good avenue to track it down if that is your want. And that's a review of that one, all done and dusted, which is very good. Now, for our second feature of the day, we are sticking with Italy, but this time we are in Naples in 1972 for the film 5 is the Perfect Number, which is a film directed by a man called Igor, or is it Igor T, who is an Italian multifaceted artist. He does basically a bit of everything. I had a read into his background, and he's one of these guys who can basically turn his hand very well to all sorts of artistic endeavours, including writing. In this case, he wrote the original graphic novel for this, and he wrote the screenplay and directed the film version from 2019. The film stars Tony Servino, it stars Valeria Giolino and Carlo Bocchioso, I think it is, in various roles. There is Tony plays Pepe, a former gangster who is friends with another former gangster called Toto the Butcher. Now, the fact that Toto is never seen in an apron with
with makes you think that he probably doesn't have a shop where he sells sausages.
Different type of butcher, I would say. So the basic story of this is Pepe is a retired gangster, as I said, and he lives a quiet life with his son in rain-soaked Napoli. And due to circumstance, his son, who is also a hitman, is killed, and Pepe is next on the list to be killed. So rather than running away, he vows revenge on whoever carried out this, and with the help of his friends, sets out to A, find out who did it, and B, kill them all, pretty much. Now, that's a very basic plot for what is quite a different type of film, I would say. It's vastly different to the film that we talked about. There are some similarities in it, but it's a completely different beast. Now, Mary, you saw this film at the film festival. I didn't see this then. I only watched it a couple of days ago. What did you think of it when you saw it the first time, and did it stand up when you rewatched it?
So I saw this. The reason I chose to go and see this the first time was because I thought the poster looked quite Hitchcock-esque, and I was intrigued by that. And I think the title credits in this they are sort of, I would say they sort of adhere to that kind of style. I love this film. I think it's so stylish. It's so slick. I love the husky voiceovers, the close-ups of all the tiny little Neapolitan streets with their cobbles, the ridiculously sort of stylized blood splatters that they do. It feels really old school and cool, and Pepe as a character I think is fantastic. Tony Servillo with that amazing gun barrel nose that he's got stuck on for this film. I just think he looks fantastic. I think I don't know, it feels kind of sort of like pulpy and stylized, but not to the extent where it loses any of its charm. I think that the characters are well fleshed out. I love all the flashbacks. And again, there's lots and lots of dry humor in this. Like, you know, there are jokes about, you know, who they have to kill, you know, life in the mob, all that sort of thing. So, yeah, for me, watching it again, I thought it absolutely stood up. I loved it. I've got a lot of time for this film.
Yeah. Again, I didn't know what to expect with this film whatsoever. I had not seen any trailers for it. I was basing everything on the fact that you had said you should watch this film. It's brilliant because you've mentioned it a few times, and
I still think about it. That's why.
Yeah, there's never been an opportunity to see it again. It's almost the same with I Can Quit Whenever I Want. It's not the easiest of films to find in order to see it. I mean, this is a film that came out just before, well, it was a year before the pandemic, and it just seems to have disappeared. I don't know if we're really missing a trick here. We should really start our own Italian film channel, have a streaming service, because there's certainly enough of them out there. But yeah, I thoroughly enjoyed this film. It's the kind of film that I really, really like, basically because I wouldn't call it a neo-noir, because it's not that type of film. It's more like a homage to the original sort of film noirs of the 30s and 40s, and the styling of it and the characters and the interactions that they actually use. So it was right on my alley. I thought, yes, this is fantastic. Loved it from the very opening scenes of it. Now, the opening scene is sort of a classic that you would get in these sort of crime dramas. You've got the old man walking down the rain-soaked streets, giving a monologue about his life, and there's a wee bit of philosophy thrown in there, and all sorts of talk about regret and traveling but not traveling, which I really liked. What did you think of all that in order to set the scene? Do you think it worked setting the scene?
Yeah. I mean, he is like resplendent in this trilby and Mac, and the sound of his beautifully made, obviously, Italian leather shoes are clattering off the cobbles, and it is, you kind of set him up, and he sounds like, you know, he's obviously lived a life, and you get his kind of silhouette sort of skulking through the streets, and you just think, yeah, that's perfect, because obviously if you were involved in sort of organised crime, you sort of would be kind of moving in the shadows. So although he appears to be obviously maybe, like, I think this is in his 70s or whatever, but he's obviously still quite agile, he's still quick-witted, he's still got a lot of, as you say, kind of philosophy going along in his head. And I just think it's as open as go. As I say, I love this film, and I love that kind of husky voiceover and the kind of silhouettes that they use. And you're right, it's not a neo-noir, but it's definitely an homage to those kind of films. And yeah, I think if you like sort of Italian mob dramas, this has got everything. It's got the sort of twinkling mandolins and the soundtrack. It's got the character and the raincoat and the hat. It's got, you know, as I say, really sort of stylized violence. It's just it's so perfect. I can't even explain it.
Yeah, I think the choices that obviously the comic book and the film made in terms of the main character were very, very deliberate. Having the crooked Roman nose. I know it's set in Napoli, but it's almost like this classical Roman nose that he has. And the fact that he wears old style clothes, it means that his silhouette is unmistakable. You know, if you see him walking past, you know exactly who it is. So he's obviously a very well-known character. And the way that it sets it up in terms of the language and the storytelling as well, because when he's walking down the street and he says, this monologue's going on, and I was once told by a Portuguese prostitute. So therefore, right away, you're given this certain level of exoticism to the proceedings. It's not just like a standard Naples prostitute. It's someone who's also more exotic, you know, someone from somewhere else who also told fortunes and about the lines in his hands and saying, "You will be a traveller." And in the 40 years, I have never left Naples. But in a way, he's saying, I've never left Naples, but I have travelled. I have changed. I have experienced life. It may only be within the streets of the city and doing what he's told as a sort of a button man or whatever. But he has actually changed, and it's all, you get the sense that he's finished. He's done with his life. He's there to offer advice to his son, which was a nice flashback about him offering initial advice to his son about why people kill and then the fragile balance of nature and life and all that. But yeah, he's just there to be a presence for him. He's got no active role in society anymore. He's just sitting about, and his friend Toto is growing begonias. That's what he does. He's, you know, they're living these sort of quiet lives that are not really impinging on anybody. They're not causing a problem for anybody. He is basically just waiting around to die because his wife had died as well. So he doesn't have that companionship anymore. But rather than just saying, yeah, I'm done, I'm not going to do anything, he still maintains like a certain standard in himself. He dresses very well. He makes sure he dresses very well. He sits, you know, he makes sure that him and his son sit and have a coffee together, because then they're talking to each other. So he's still living, but it is kind of a hollow existence. And it's only when his son is killed that the old sort of fire starts again, and he changes. And that's basically what pushes the story forward again. Now, similarly to the previous film we talked about, this is only about an hour and 40 minutes, an hour and 45 minutes as well. Yeah. It does not hang about.
No. And I think that so the film's split into 5 chapters, and the pacing of it, I think, is fantastic. I was worried initially when I saw this the first time around that it would be a little bit of style over substance, because obviously Igor Tuveri is a graphic novelist. He's a kind of like physical artist or whatever you want to call it. So I was worried that there was going to be a case of it would look amazing, but it didn't really do anything story-wise. That's absolutely not the case. I think the story moves, as you say, it gets stuck in really quickly. The death of his son happens quite early on. And I think that the pacing of it is fantastic, because there's so much packed into it. You get, as you say, this really strong sense of who Pepe is. He's this kind of sort of older authority figure now who's retired. And then all of a sudden, when we're plunged into seeing who he was when he was maybe active in the mafia, it's absolutely rapid fire from there as well. And all of a sudden, this man who's quite clearly in his 70s and is cutting about in raincoats and braces is, you know, shooting people across the streets of Naples. And it's just these beautifully choreographed sort of violent scenes that you just wouldn't expect from somebody of an older generation, and yet it still works.
Yeah, you see that several times, in that he's always in control in his movements and everything, and the way it looks very practiced, which you would kind of expect for somebody who's at the top of the game. They never stop learning. That's what you find with people who are very, very good at something. They're always learning and they're always practicing. So any move that he makes, when he was like going in and out of rooms and things like that during one of the shootouts, he wasn't just going in and shooting wildly or anything. It was all very pointed. It was all very disciplined. And he would hide and he would move. And it's very sort of militaristic in the way that they would clear rooms and things like that. And it worked really well, because it showed that these guys were consummate professionals. That's why they got to that age. in the first place,
Yeah.
because
Yeah,
they knew
that's
what they
true.
were doing. Yeah.
That's why they'd survived. There's that really beautiful shot as well where he's like behind this red curtain, and he's, again, you see him in silhouette and this the really distinct sort of nose, and there's like a cinema projector, I think it is. Yeah, he's in a cinema going across, and you just think, yeah, this is a man who, even though he is kind of older, you would not mess about with him, and you know that the minute his son, and it is quite funny because his son's like, I need to go and kill this magician and I can't really be arsed, and he's like, well, you have to go and do it, you've signed a contract, sort of thing. And you can tell that this is a man who has lived his life through, you know, you've signed the contract and therefore you see it through. There's a different set of code of conduct, as it were. It's not one that maybe most people would adhere to, but for him there's obviously rules, and you stick to these rules, and if you've made a promise, you keep it, etc. And that's very obvious in his movement, his stature, the way he holds himself, the way he conducts himself. And I just think all these little pieces of the character come together really beautifully, and it's those kind of still shots where, as I say, you maybe see him in silhouette that you really appreciate because they're so striking and so telling of as to who he is.
With this type of film, which is basically a revenge drama, it would be very easy to lose interest in it quite quickly because we have seen so many of them. We know pretty much the beats that are going to happen within the revenge drama. And this one doesn't stray too far from what we expect, but why do you think it's better than most of them?
That's actually a really good question. I think visually it's extremely striking. Like, I think there's a lot to be appreciated here in terms of cinematography, set design, costume, all that sort of thing. And I think that because the character is a bit older, I think that's quite unusual as well. I know that obviously Liam Neeson from Taken onwards basically brought in this idea that sort of middle-aged men or whatever, the kind of stars to revenge films. But this, you know, he's older than that still. He's I think they say he's in his 70s or whatever. So I think the fact that the character's a bit older makes it different. But I also think that there's so much kind of wrapped up in these lovely little still moments, as I say. So there's that scene where he's explaining to Rita where the title of the film comes from.
Yes.
And it's, you know, his cousin who was nicknamed Turtle. And it's moments like that. And it really takes its time with showing things, like, as I say, close-ups of like espressos being poured and the steam coming off them, or shoes being tied, and you can see how nice the leather is and stuff like that. I think the fact that it does take its time to pause in amongst all of this, I think is quite rare, because like the film we've just talked about, which was like, from start to finish, which is fine, because I really loved that film as well. But I think that you don't get tired of seeing like rain-soaked Naples streets in this film, because it just adds to this sort of flavour of who this character is and where he cut his teeth as well. So I think it's maybe in these sort of maybe quieter moments that I think you really appreciate how striking this film is.
Yeah, I think it works because it doesn't try to ignore the fact of what it is. It knows that it's a revenge drama, and it plays into that in a couple of very sort of subtle ways, like when he's in the cinema, he's watching a Shaw Brothers film, which is obviously some sort of one man against the multitudes, so there's a sort of this similar sort of element in there as well. And there are wee sort of touches and wee sort of points of note, like for instance in the opening sequence when he's walking down the streets, he walks past a wall, and on the wall are two posters for the film The Killers, which is Lee Marvin, Angie Dickinson film from I don't think it's the Burt Lancaster one, I think it's the Lee Marvin one, and that again is a very sort of similar storyline to it. So it's kind of saying, yeah, these things have been done in the past, and we acknowledge that these things exist in our world. This kind of art exists, this kind of story exists, and these kind of stories are, you know, these stories go back to biblical times, don't they? The kind of revenge stories and everything like that. So they're acknowledging that they're there, but this is our take on them. We acknowledge that there's others out there, but this is how we are going to do it, and we're going to do it in terms of how we tell the story and what you're actually seeing on the screen. Like you say, the visuals, it sets out very early on. This is what it looks like. It's rain-soaked. It's moody, but it's not like dirty or anything like that. It's all nice and clean, everything, which is good in terms of noir because there's lots of shadows and darkness and the odd stab of light and things like that as well, which obviously helps with all your silhouettes and everything like that as well. So it works in those sort of ways, but it basically, it doesn't try to hide the fact of what it is. It doesn't try to say, well, we're a wee bit unique here, we're kind of something different. It's not really, but that is not the point. The point is reveling in the time that you spend with these characters. Now, with this film, there are maybe 2-3 main characters in here. You've got Toto, you've got Rita, and you've got Pepe. How do you think they all kind of worked together? Especially Rita, because she is obviously a character who has been in and out of Pepe's life for a number of years.
It's an interesting one because, as I say, they've got Pepe and Toto. Obviously, as we've said, doesn't work in the butcher shop in your local high street.
Yeah,
they've obviously got quite a clear code of conduct, and it's interesting the flashbacks that we see of Pepe with his son, and he wants to, read a comic book, and he's sort of explaining to him that, sometimes you need the bad guys and all that sort of thing. But it does sort of set up this weird scene of domesticity that you don't necessarily associate with somebody who is, committed to a violent organization. And we see a glimpse of his wife, and he talks about his wife in such loving terms and how he misses her. So Rita, the character of Rita is really interesting because it's obvious that her and Pepe have kind of been on and off for quite some time, but that she's obviously quite a bit younger than him. So that kind of snatches away any sort of notion that, yes, he was this kind of bad guy in his professional life, but in his personal life, he was squeaky clean, because he obviously hasn't been.
Yeah.
So I quite like that dynamic. I don't think she's given a lot to do. Again, kind of similar to Julia in the other film that we talked about. I don't think she's given a lot to do. She's there to kind of sit and listen for a lot of it, but I do think that her dynamic with Pepe is clearly quite loving and quite tender, and she obviously wants to look after him, and she is involved in some of the sort of like gunfire and stuff like that happens, but I don't think she's given masses to do. However, I think that the character of Pepe in particular is so strong that he is what's drawing you into this film, and he is, what keeps you hooked right up until the end. And Toto, obviously, they all make fun of him for just wanting to retire and grow his begonias. But that's clearly, I feel like Toto's seen some shit as well that he's never quite ready to disclose. But I like their dynamic as well, because do you know what I always think about? I remember being in Sicily, so not Naples, but Sicily, and seeing these old men that they brought their dining table down to the beach, and they were dressed in waistcoats and ties, and they were all playing cards and smoking cigars and stuff like that. And they were so easy with each other, like their dynamic was just so natural. And I feel like that's what Pepe and Toto have with each other. Like, they obviously go way, way back, and they've obviously seen and done some really bad things together. But now that they're kind of older, they've got this sort of, we can almost sort of like we bickering old men kind of dynamic going on, but not quite. I do think it works. There's obviously a very romanticized notion, I think, of life in the mafia that has come through cinema, and I don't think this quite adheres to that fully. I think it is making it clear that there's a lot of wrong involved, and but as I say, it's a different code of conduct, I think.
No, you're right. It's like Toto is the work wife in a lot of ways.
Yeah,
It's that kind of idea. They have this relationship where they are back and forward, and we minor criticisms each other, but it doesn't seem to affect the way that they actually interact. And the fact that when Pepe does something instinctual and it results in all sorts of problems, Toto just goes along with it. And then complains afterwards, obviously, but he's not going to complain at the time. He knows exactly what he has to do in that sort of situation. So I really like that, and I like that character quite a lot, because he was the one that was always trying to sort of ground everybody. Was trying to say, "No, wait a minute, no, we should be doing this, we should be doing that," and Pepe's just saying, "No, this is what I want to do." I liked Rita in this because you didn't really know, like you say, there could have been a relationship in there, or it could have been the type of relationship that didn't actually. It was almost like it was almost about to happen, but it never really resulted. There was obviously the intent in there, which is just as sort of bad as actually having an affair and sort of cheating on your wife. So if the intent is there and they're taking it to the very edge of that, that would be the same. And that's the kind of idea that I got, because she's always like pining for him. But it's entirely possible that, yes, they had more of an involvement. I like the fact that although she was kind of quite a timid character, again, like Toto, she would do whatever was necessary. If that included picking up a gun and defending herself, then she would do that, because, and it wasn't done in a stylistic way or anything, the way that when Toto and Pepe were like twirling around each other and they were all doing the back-to-back things and all this, and then the figure T stuff and all. It wasn't like that. It was a lot more like someone who doesn't really know how to handle a gun. So I like the fact that she wasn't just suddenly really stylish with all of that as well. And a lot of the sort of kills that she made were more luck than anything else, just because of where she was actually situated within the scene, and she was able to get somebody as they came through a door or whatever. So yeah, I did like her character quite a lot. I thought she brought in a slightly different dynamic to the two men.
Yeah, if it had just been Pepe and Toto, it would be a completely different film. I think that, but what I would say all of those characters have in common, as we've said, given that Pepe and Toto have made it to their 70s, is this sort of like survival instinct. Like, and as you say, although Rita's kills were kind of flukes for the most part, she did understand that in a particular situation it was kill or be killed. And so there's, which kind of gives this as sort of alludes to this idea that all of them, even if they aren't directly involved in a crime organization, understand that that's just the way life is in that particular era, in that particular city, and that it's, you know, a kind of survival of the fittest sort of thing that they've all kind of bought into, whether they are good with a gun or not.
Yeah. There is a scene early on, and kind of alluded to it, and it's the death of Pepe's son, where he goes to kill this magician. Yeah, who's called Mr. X.
Yeah, they just say it with such disgust that they're like, oh, he's a magician.
And he's this guy that it's a very sort of 70s take on a sort of rock and roller, because in the 70s there was a rock and roll revival with bands, well, in the UK especially, with bands like Showaddy Waddy and Mud and all that. So it was all the sort of brothel creepers and all this sort of stuff. So obviously it wasn't just here, it was basically everywhere. So this is a character, Mr. X, with the big sort of rockabilly hairdo and the sideburns and everything. So bad, yeah. And with a nice wee tie-in to the Portuguese prostitute, he also tells fortunes based on dreams and things like that. So Pepe's son recounts this dream to him about the cat living in his stomach and all this. What did you think? Do you think that was a distraction, or did you think it just added to the weirdness of the film?
It is a strange moment in a film that is like quite straight, I say straight in terms of like dialogue, and that it doesn't, there's not sort of like magic realism or whatever in here. It is very much a straightforward film. So it is a very strange moment, but I think because you know that he has been sent there to kill Mr. X, all of this build up when he's telling this story about the cat in his stomach, it just basically adds a layer of tension, because you're kind of like, well, is he going to kill him now? Or how is he going to do it? Is it going to be, you know, he goes into telling his fortune and then he shoots him halfway through or whatever? So I do think that it added a layer of tension, but it is one of the strangest moments of the film, especially because Pepe, obviously, who we've been introduced to, very much has a look, and that look, I would say, is about 20 years older than when this film is set. And so to see Mr. X with his ridiculous pompadour and what looks like eyeliner, which I imagine was probably quite controversial in the 70s and in Naples, if you were a man, and this sort of kind of more sort of flamboyant costume, about him as well. So immediately he's kind of set up as something different to what Pepe and his son are in terms of looks and all that sort of thing. But it adds a very thick layer of tension, because you're kind of wondering where that story's going and when the hit is going to take place. But it is the strangest moment of dialogue in this film.
Yeah, for me, in a way, it didn't quite fit in, because the fact that Pepe's a professional, his son is obviously a professional, you would think that he would just go there, shoot the guy and leave right away.
Yeah.
But obviously, he obviously wasn't feeling particularly well and things like that. And maybe this whole thing about the dream and all that was actually quite real, and it was something that was worrying him, because it was maybe because he wasn't well, he was having sort of these kind of fever dreams kind of idea, and he's trying to work out what it actually means now. And when they started going into it and all that, and I liked the fact that he said, you know, and the cat was in my stomach and therefore I had bad breath. Okay. I don't know how that kind of works, but
yeah.
But yes, I felt it was a little bit out of place considering what came before and what came after, but it didn't detract from the film for me. So
no, if anything, it gives you that really glorious shootout between them, and it gives you a real sense, because obviously the blood in this film is like a ridiculous shade of red, and it sort of spatters in a way that you wouldn't expect it to as well. So because you get to see that up close with his death, and it happens in slow motion, and you get to see the bright red sort of splashing off the pavement, it does sort of set up stylistically what this film is going to do with the violence for the rest of it as well. So again, if you're expecting something that's kind of hyper realistic, it is to some elements, but the violence in it is so over the top and so stylized. But again, I think it works.
Yep. So you just touched on there on the violence. Now, we are talking about actors who are in their 70s here in the main roles. So therefore, all the scenes of violence all involve guns rather than anything else. You're not going to get any sort of John Wick style action here from any of the characters, because, well, they couldn't physically do it, and if there was a way to do it through some sort of trickery, it wouldn't look right, because it doesn't fit in with the age of them. Now, obviously, that limits the filmmakers then in terms of what they can actually put on screen. And the fact is, there are maybe, is there like 3-4 different shootout sequences?
Yeah.
So how do you think they were able to differentiate between all of them and make them all interesting, which I thought they were?
Yeah, so I think they are all quite different. So you've got the big sort of, I'm going to call it like the lights out shootout in the corridor when they go to Don Guarino's offices.
Yeah.
And obviously that's all to do with sort of like blood splatter and flashes of light, because obviously there's the guns that are creating sort of spark, and then the lights are obviously getting shot off the walls. So that's really cool, and that there's, again, shadows used really effectively, and you're kind of wondering, oh, who's that? And, you know, you're not quite catching a glimpse of who somebody is, and they're sort of climbing over all these various henchmen to get out of the corridor. So that was really well done. And then you've got as you mentioned, the sort of back-to-back T-shaped choreography, and you've got the kind of like, I don't know, kind of funereal sort of bombastic sounding music over the top of that, and that feels very choreographed and very stylized, whereas the one in the corridor doesn't. It feels just sort of they are shooting their way out of a building. So I do think it definitely it does things quite differently. And then you've got a shootout in a sort of balcony area within a block of flats, and then one within a doctor's office as well. So they do all have quite distinct settings, and sort of choreography wise, they're all quite different as well, because the shootouts take place for different reasons, and it's the reasons behind these shootouts that sort of make them all slightly different, if that makes sense. It's not just people blindly shooting at each other. There is a specific reason as to why this is happening. So I do think that they definitely make the most of the setting. So in particular, you know, like for example, shootout where they're doing the sort of back-to-back choreography. You've got the sort of walls and the railings that are casting shadows. You've got the tight space of the corridor and the doctor's office that make things a lot more personal. So I do think they make the most of the setting and the various plot points to make these kind of fight choreography scenes a little bit different. Because, as you said, I mean, both are in their 70s. You're not expecting anybody to be jumping off a building or kicking the shit out of somebody down a flight of stairs. Like, it's a very different type of fighting. And also because these guys, as they say, they are retired, and you kind of get the impression they haven't picked up a gun for a wee while. So it would be ridiculous if they were doing something, you know, like super over the top.
Yeah, a lot of it will be muscle memory for them. So they just know instinctively what to do. Yeah, I would agree with you there. It's interesting that you say that the sort of the action scenes are done based on circumstance more than anything else. Now, we don't get an awful lot of that. What it seems to be is filmmakers come up with the action scenes first and then try and work the plot in around that. And that doesn't seem to be the case here. It works very well with the plot, and it's as a result of previous actions. And they've obviously said, right, we need to have this scene here where there is going to be violence. Now, that works for me because it's not done for the sake of it. It's the violence is intrinsic to the plot, you know, rather than the sex scene being intrinsic to the plot. And you'll be glad to know that there are no sex scenes in this film involving a 70-year-old hook-nosed gangster, which I thought was particularly nice. I thought that they managed to avoid that quite neatly. But yes, they changed the way that they did them all. Like, say, there was the confines of the doctor's office. There was the staircase scene, which again was kind of confined space, if you like, because there was like sort of high sides to the stairs and everything. So there was all sorts. And then you had like the big sort of final one, which was on a rooftop. With two, and it was very symmetrical because there was two entrances and they met in the middle, and there was the Campari sign. You saw the back.
I love
the big
that.
Sign.
Such a nice touch. But it's also red as well, so you've got that as a sort of backdrop to, as you say, this beautifully symmetrical sort of showdown, as it were. But that's I loved seeing that Campari sign. I was just like, of course that would be on a rooftop. Like, of course it would be.
Yeah, there was one wee bit as well. It was just at the tail end of the shootout where they were leaving the Don's house, and he goes down a flight of stairs and hides behind this sort of clock and shoots a couple of people, and then the doctor comes and picks him up in the car. I actually stayed there when I was in Naples, and I recognised it right away. Yeah, the building that was actually on when he comes down the stairs, it's the building on his left-hand side. There's apartments in there, and we were in there for a couple. And as soon as I saw it, I went, "Oh!"
I love that. That's brilliant. And did you feel like you missed a trick when you were there, then not getting a shadowy photo up against the wall?
You know, I could have put on a fedora and acted a scene or two. You know, I don't know how impressed anyone would have been around me, or Leslie, because she would have not wanted to take any photographs of me while I was doing that. So, but yeah, it was nice seeing that as well. Now, like you say, the film is set in 5 chapters, I believe. Yeah, because 5 is a perfect number, obviously, and it goes to a wildly different place in the 5th chapter. It's I won't go into any sort of detail, but it is completely different to how it's set out. Do you think that kind of worked? Because it did tie things up quite neatly, and it gave you a whole other aspect of the story as well when it was doing that, when in the 5th act, where Pepe was describing how things progressed towards the end. Now, do you think that worked, given that it was such a radical departure from the sort of previous 4 chapters?
Yeah, because it ties into a lot of what's said throughout the film, as you've noted in his opening monologue in particular. It kind of ties into elements of that. But I also think that in a way, now because this this is set on a series of graphic novels, it kind of feels like it's setting it up for more. Because albeit some loose ends are tied up, there are quite a few twists that are revealed within the last few minutes that kind of make you go, oh, I wasn't expecting that, or oh, well, what does that mean for this character, or what does that mean for Pepe? And actually, there's loads of really nice touches, just even in those particular scenes. So Rita is reading the Leopard, which I remember well from uni, which is about warring factions in a small city. So even that just sort of ties into everything that we've seen over the past like hour and a half or whatever it is. But I do think in a way that it ties some things up, but it leaves enough loose ends that it leaves you wanting more. I don't feel like what we get to see is the last of Pepe's story. I know obviously there hasn't been any sequels, but I think it does leave you wanting a bit more.
Yeah, the way I looked at that was, it is a bit like sort of real life in that you don't have an ending until, you get a bullet in the brain or whatever, or you die a natural cause in your bed, whatever. But by tying things up very neatly in a bow, it's not really satisfying, because there should always be something that's still going on, even if it is just a sense of regret over his part in certain things that happen, or like a feeling that there is unfinished business. You don't need to know that. You can use your own imagination to say, well, yes, you can go and, what can come from this is, there could be a whole other story attached to this, which there hasn't been, obviously. And I mean, that was 6 years ago now that this film was made. So, and I don't know if there was like a follow up to the source material either. So I don't know. I don't think so.
I kind of thought, because it was based in graphic novels, maybe it would leave it a bit sort of open. But I'm okay with the fact that, as you say, it reflects real life. Like this is a guy who, not to use the whole just when I thought I was out kind of thing, but he did think he was done with that sort of life, and he obviously gets pulled back into it. So I'm okay with the fact that this isn't tied up neatly in a bow, because the type of world that he's involved in is never going to be tied up neatly in a bow, because there's always going to be these different factions or different dons leading different families that are always going to want a little bit more power or a little bit more of the city, or whatever it is. So I'm quite comfortable with how this ends, because I do think it does sort of relate back to his opening monologue quite well.
So what was your favourite moment in the film?
Apart from the back-to-back choreography, as I'm calling it, because I just think that's absolutely glorious to watch, it's a scene right at the start where Pepe is telling his son, he's trying to sort of pep him up into going out and killing this magician. And he says, to get engaged to your mother, I had to wipe out her entire family. She didn't even bat an eye. And then you see this like horrific like flashback, which is obviously done like sort of in full shadow, because it's just these cars stacked against a completely black wall and black flooring. And you see him obviously meant to be as a younger man. Just totally like machine gunning out her entire family. And I just thought it's a moment that he's telling this story, like, and he thinks it's endearing, but everyone else looking at it is going, that's fucking awful. And that was his pep talk to his son. And I love that. I thought it set up the tone for the film absolutely perfectly, because there is quite a few bits of dry humour in it. And as I say, he thinks it's this like sort of lasting love story, but anyone else looking at it would think it was the worst thing somebody had ever done.
Yeah. For me, it was like it was a really small moment. It's when he shot somebody in the stomach, and then when the way that the camera works in that moment is the camera is almost at the back of the person who's being shot, and when the body falls away, you see the gun, and there's blood all over the barrel, which there would be, because that's kind of like a realistic thing that would happen, and you just don't see that in so many films. And it brings home the absolute brutality of what he does. He's not a nice guy. He kills for a living. He's obviously reconciled himself to this. This is what he does, but it still it emphasizes that he is not a nice guy, and you shouldn't really be sympathizing with him, despite his nice wee speeches to his son about like, look at the crossword, what you see the white because there is black there, and all this sort of stuff, emphasizing the sort of yin and yang and good and evil and all that. But just that one wee moment more than anything else, I thought, yep, that's excellent. That's really in a very subtle way. It just shows you that this is exactly what this guy's capable of, and this is what he does. There's no way to sugarcoat it at that point.
Yeah, as well, because obviously we are seeing him sort of at the end of his career, it did me, and you do, as I say, in that flashback there, he talks about obviously wiping out his wife's entire family. It's in those moments that when he's obviously very adept at what he does, it does make you think, God, what was he like in his 20s and 30s? Like at the peak of his game, he must have been, and as you say, he survived, therefore he must have been a good shot, but he must have been brutal. And yet we are seeing him as this sort of like, not grandpa figure, but he is a kind of older man, and he does sort of draw you into this story, and his voiceovers are very sort of wistful and philosophical. But yeah, it does make you think, what was he like when he was at the absolute peak of his game?
Yeah, when you see him, he's more of a sort of statesman type figure, very wise, and people come to him for advice, that sort of thing. His son listens to him, which is obviously a big point, because then he trusts what his father is saying. But yes, you're right. Yeah, he is in that position for a reason. I like the fact that he says, that his wife didn't bat an eye when he killed everybody, but yet he still had to carry her away. So she may have had a few objections initially. It was like an over the shoulder sort of fireman's whip type of thing. Yeah. So yeah, it's all very caveman, very primitive, I suppose.
It is, but again, it's sort of like it makes it clear that, as I've said throughout this, that he does have a very different set of like ethics, and they obviously are something that he clings to very dearly, but they're just so different and so far removed to what we as sort of normal people would imagine. Yeah,
oh, definitely. So this sounds like a very stupid question, but would you recommend this film?
Yes, I need everyone to see this. I'm in love with it. I was so worried, because I've talked this up, and I was so worried you were going to watch it and be like, Mary, that was absolutely shite. And I was also worried that I was going to rewatch it and think, God, that hasn't stacked up at all. But it's so beautiful to look at. The characters are amazing. The setting, the costumes, the score, the philosophizing, the violence. I absolutely love this film, and I feel it's such a shame that both of these films actually are so hard to find, because they're so worth the watch.
Yeah. Oh, I would agree with you. These are excellent films. I really enjoyed this film. Like I said, didn't know what to expect, and I enjoyed it from moment one. And it is a bit of a pity that it's so difficult to see it. The reason, like I say, we are talking about them in the first place is not because we are trying to be dead elitist and say, look at the stuff we're watching. If only you could see the stuff that we're watching. Yeah. It's just because we both had seen one each of them, and we were both enamored with them and wanted other people to see them. So yeah, it's not an elitist thing. It's not how wonderful we are, but obviously we're wonderful people anyway, and if more people acknowledge that, then the world would be a nicer place.
I mean, it's not like these are like super highbrow films. One's a mafia revenge thriller, and the other one's a sort of like crime comedy caper sort of thing. It's films like this though that kind of prove my point that the international cinema is really accessible, because it is stories that we're familiar with. It's just a shame that we're not getting to see more of it.
Yeah, there is a real gap in the market for these type of films, and it's only partially filmed by the likes of Mubi and BFI.
Yeah,
there should be more of it, but you just don't see it, unfortunately, which is a real shame, and it makes it very difficult to actually find things. So, but maybe if more people try and seek these things out, then someone with a bit of money and a service will put these things out as well. You never know. Anyway, that is it for today as far as we're concerned. You can find us on all the normal social media channels. If you are so inclined to get in touch with us, you just need to have a research for Moviescramble, and we'll be there. You can email us at podcast@moviescramble.co.uk, unless you're trying to sell us Dorilla pillows or any of these Japanese knives, which I am kind of fed up about having to block these. It's really slyly done, because it's all from different source addresses, so you can never You know, it doesn't matter if you block them or not because it comes from a different one, because it's all spam.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we will reconvene. We don't exactly know at the moment what we're going to be doing over the next couple of... We've got some ideas, but we like to keep things as fresh as possible. So we may do a new review. We may do something else. We've got a few things on the go. That's it from us today. So thank you very much, everybody, and cheerio.
Bye.